welcome to the deep dive.
Yeah.
Imagine for a second that you are a student of language.
Or maybe you are actively studying to be a translator.
Right, exactly.
Right.
You are sitting at your desk, you're staring at a piece of text, and you're trying to figure out how to bridge the gap between two completely different languages.
And it feels less like writing and more like, I don't know, diffusing a linguistic bomb.
It really does. So today's mission is to crack the code of translation. And we are going to do that by looking at a truly foundational text. We are diving into J.C. Catford's highly influential 1965 book, A Linguistic Theory of Translation.
It is an absolute classic in the field for a very good reason. Catford really completely changed the way we look at what happens when we move words from one language to another.
Yeah.
He gave us a framework that moves translation from just a guessing game to a systematic process.
And for those of you listening, especially if you are a student wrestling with language studies right now, we have a very clear goal today. We want to help you truly understand the core of this whole process.
Which means looking closely at two major concepts.
Right. First, we're going to explore the true nature of equivalence. Basically, what does it actually mean for two pieces of text to be considered equal?
Yes.
And the second idea is the age-old battle of form versus meaning.
Those are the perfect guiding stars for this. I mean, understanding the tension between the physical form of the words and the underlying meaning, that is the cornerstone of any translation work.
So let me start with a question that I think anyone who has ever studied a new language has agonized over at some point. Why is it that translating something word for word almost always sounds robotic or clunky or just completely wrong?
Oh, it is the ultimate trap for beginners.
Right.
We inherently want to trust the dictionary. We want it to be simple. But to tease what we're going to uncover today, the answer lies in realizing that meaning isn't some universal substance floating freely in the air.
It's not something you can just catch in a net.
Exactly. Meaning is completely owned by the language it belongs to.
Okay, so if word-for-word translation is such a trap, how did Catford suggest we fix it? Because I know he challenged the very definition of what we are doing when we translate.
He absolutely did. He gets incredibly clinical with it, actually. According to the source, he defines translation as an operation on languages.
An operation.
Yes. Specifically, he says it is the process of substituting a text in one language, which we call the source language, with an equivalent text in another language, the target language.
Wait, I want to pause right there.
Yeah.
Because the word he uses is fascinating. Substituting. He doesn't say transferring.
Precisely. And that distinction, that one word,
Oh.
is the earthquake at the center of Catford's theory.
It completely reframed things for me. Because people usually think about translation like, well, like a bucket.
The bucket analogy, yes.
Right. You think you have a bucket of meaning in English, you scoop up that meaning, you carry the bucket over the border to France, and you pour the exact same meaning into a French container.
And Catford says this is entirely impossible.
Completely impossible.
Completely. You cannot transfer meaning. And what's fascinating here is why he says that.
Okay.
According to his theory, an English text has an English meaning. A French text has a French meaning. A Russian text has a Russian meaning.
Wait, so if I'm not moving meaning from English to French, what exactly am I doing? Because substitution sounds a bit, I don't know, almost like a math equation where I just swap a variable.
Think of it this way. Meaning is defined by the unique network of rules, grammar, history, and vocabulary within that specific language system.
Right.
Meaning is a property of the language, not a property of the physical world. So when you translate, you aren't taking the English meaning and moving it. You are substituting source language meanings with target language meanings.
Oh, so it's more like currency exchange.
Yes.
If I take a US dollar to Europe, I don't try to force the merchant to accept my physical dollar bill. I trade it for a euro.
Right.
The euro has its own value within its own economic system, but it serves the equivalent function for buying my coffee.
That is a brilliant way to look at it. The value is established by the system it exists in. Let's connect this directly to you, the listener, and how you learn a new language.
Yeah, think about when you first start learning.
If you just take an English sentence in your head and try to swap out the English words for French words one by one while keeping your native language's internal meaning structure.
You sound totally unnatural. You sound like early translation software from the 90s.
Exactly. To really speak the new language fluently, you have to learn its unique perspective on the world. You have to use its meanings.
So the goal of a translator is not to magically teleport meaning across borders.
No.
The goal is to find the right substitution. You are looking for the target language text that works in the exact same situation as the source language text.
Spot on.
Oh, I follow the logic. But if we are substituting currencies, to use my analogy, how do we know we are making a fair trade? How do we know things are actually equal?
And that brings us to our second big focus, the battle of form versus meaning.
Yes, the core dilemma of the entire profession.
It really is. And the source gives us two big concepts that every student of translation needs to know to understand how we measure this equality.
Okay, lay them out for us.
The first concept is formal correspondence, which deals entirely with the form, the physical structure.
Right.
The second is textual equivalence, which deals with the meaning or the function in reality.
Let's take those one at a time. I'll play the curious student here. What exactly is formal correspondence? Is that just grammar textbook stuff?
Essentially, yes. Formal correspondence is a theoretical match. It happens at the structural or grammatical level.
Like what?
It's when a grammatical category in language A seems to occupy the exact same spot in the rulebook as a category in language B.
Like comparing an English noun to a French noun, or an adjective to an adjective.
Exactly. The source actually uses prepositions as a really good example of this. If you analyze a huge corpus of translated texts, you will find that the English word class called preposition formally corresponds to the French word class called preposition about 75% of the time.
75%. I mean, that sounds pretty reliable. I'd take those odds in Vegas.
You might, but Catford gives a massive warning here for translators. Formal correspondence is almost always just an approximation.
Because they're different systems.
Right. Languages are entirely separate, independent systems. So just because two things look the same on a grammar chart or they share the same label like preposition, it does not mean they do the exact same job in the real world 25% of the time.
And I imagine that 25% is where all the catastrophic translation errors happen.
That is exactly where they happen, which is why we cannot rely solely on formal correspondence. We need the other side of the coin, which is textual equivalence.
So if formal correspondence is what happens in the sterile environment of a grammar textbook, textual equivalence is what happens in the messy reality of a real sentence.
Perfectly said. Textual equivalence is an empirical phenomenon.
Meaning you discover it by observing.
Yes, by observing real life, not by looking up rules. It is the specific target language text that is observed to be the equivalent of a source language text in a specific real-world situation.
Okay, but how do we observe it? How do we prove that one text is the equivalent of another without just guessing? Because the source mentions a specific method Catfood uses called the commutation test.
The commutation test, yes.
Walk us through that, because it sounds a bit like a chemistry experiment.
It is very much like a scientific method for linguistics. The commutation test is a way to systematically prove equivalence by swapping parts out and observing the reaction.
Okay, give us an example.
Let's take a simple English phrase. My son is 6.
My son is 6, got it.
And let's say a bilingual expert naturally translates that into French as Mon fils a 6 ans.
Okay, so we have our two sentences on the table. My son is 6, and mon fils a 6 ans. How do we prove what equals what?
We commute. We isolate the variables. We systematically change one piece of the English text and see what inevitably changes in the French text. Let's ask you to do it. Change the subject of the English sentence.
All right, I'll change my son to your daughter. So the English is now, your daughter is 6.
Right. Now we look at what the bilingual expert does with the French. They naturally adjust it to votre fille a 6 ans.
Ah, I see. So because mon fils naturally shifted to votre fille at the exact moment that my son shifted to your daughter, we have scientifically proven that mon fils is the textual equivalent of my son in this specific situation.
Precisely. You discovered the textual equivalence by observing what changes when you swap things around.
That makes so much sense.
You aren't opening a dictionary. You are observing real language behavior. It isolates the functional pieces of the language.
I really love that approach.
Mm.
It grounds the theory in something tangible. But let's be real for a second. Translation isn't always that neat and tidy.
Not at all.
The variables don't always line up perfectly. Sometimes the physical form of the words and the situational meaning are completely at war with each other.
And this is where the real art and honestly the real frustration of translation begins.
Right. Earlier we talked about the urge to translate word for word, which Catford calls a rank-bound translation.
Yes, rank-bound.
Meaning you are binding yourself, restricting yourself to staying at the lowest grammatical rank possible. You desperately try to make every individual word match a word.
And as we've established, that often ends in disaster because you are prioritizing formal correspondence over textual equivalence. You are choosing the form over the situation.
Let's look at a famous example from the text to show why this word-for-word approach falls apart. We have the English idiom, "It's raining cats and dogs."
A nightmare for rank-bound translator.
Truly. It reminds me of being in a foreign country, armed only with a pocket dictionary, confidently translating an idiom word for word and just getting looks of utter confusion from the locals.
We have all been there.
If we try to do a rank-bound translation of raining cats and dogs into French, focusing only on the form, we get "Il est pleuvant chat et chien."
Which is grammatically atrocious in French.
Yeah.
It sounds completely ridiculous. A French person wouldn't just be confused, they would think you were having a vivid hallucination about falling animals.
So the form completely fails us. We have to break the rules.
Yes.
We have to do what Catford calls an unbounded translation, a free translation.
Yes, you have to untether yourself from the grammar. And the proper unbounded translation in French for that situation is "Il pleut à verse."
Which means something functionally closer to, it's pouring.
Right. So to get to that good natural translation, you have to perform what the source heavily emphasizes, which are translation shifts.
Translation shifts.
They are the absolute core of a translator's toolkit. A shift means you are deliberately, consciously departing from formal correspondence.
You're breaking the formal rules on purpose.
On purpose. You completely stop caring about making an English noun equal a French noun. You stop caring about making a phrase equal a phrase.
You completely let go of the form.
You have to. You let go of the form and you focus purely on finding the matching situational equivalence. You ask yourself, what is the actual situation happening here?
The situation is heavy torrential rain.
Exactly. How does a French speaker express that exact situation? Il pleut à verse. You have shifted the grammar. You have entirely shifted the vocabulary to save the situational meaning.
Let me bring up another great example from the source that highlights this tension beautifully. It's a Russian phrase, "Bog esnimi."
Oh, this is a great one.
Now, if you are a beginner looking at the formal structure, you might translate it literally. Word for word, it formally corresponds to "God with them."
Which carries a very specific tone in English.
It does.
It sounds grand, solemn, perhaps a bit religious or deeply blessing someone.
Right. If a character in a book says "God with them," you think they are offering a serious prayer. But the source points out that the true textual equivalent, the phrase that matches the actual situation where this is casually spoken in Russian, is "never mind about them."
That is a massive conceptual shift. From God with them to never mind about them.
It is. But let me push back slightly as a devil's advocate.
Go for it.
Isn't it a bit dangerous for a translator to just completely discard the original wording like that? It feels almost like rewriting the author's work.
It can feel that way, especially for a student. But think about the alternative.
Okay.
If you don't make that shift, if you aggressively cling to the formal rules to preserve the exact words, you are giving the target reader completely the wrong idea of what is happening in the conversation.
That's true.
You are making a casual dismissal sound like a religious ceremony. You are actually failing the author by misrepresenting the situation.
That makes perfect sense. Your loyalty must be to the situation, not to the dictionary. You have to be brave enough to completely dismantle the structure of a sentence, if that's what it takes to make the target reader feel the exact same thing the original reader felt.
Translation is an act of calculated destruction and recreation.
Okay, so that brings up a very natural follow-up question. If we have this freedom to shift,
Yes.
if we are willing to break all the grammatical rules and do these massive translation shifts to chase the situation, does that mean literally everything can be translated?
It is the ultimate question in linguistics. And Catford says, no.
No. There are hard limits.
There are absolute limits to translatability, and we are moving into our final area of exploration here.
Lay it on us.
According to the source, translation officially fails when it is impossible to build functionally relevant features of the situation into the target text. And these failures fall into two distinct categories:
Which are?
linguistic untranslatability and cultural untranslatability.
Let's tackle linguistic untranslatability first. When does the language itself become a brick wall? Is this just about things like puns?
Puns are the most common and obvious example, yes.
Because the joke relies on the specific sound of the word.
Right. A pun works because a specific word has two meanings, or sounds exactly like another word, purely by coincidence in one specific language, you can't translate the form without losing the double meaning.
That makes sense.
But the source gives us a much more technical and, frankly, more interesting example of this called shared exponents.
Shared exponents. That sounds like a complicated tax bracket. Break that down for us in simple terms.
I will try. Think about how words are built. Let's look at the letter S at the end of an English word.
Okay, the letter S.
The source points out that this one tiny linguistic unit does completely different jobs depending on the word. In the noun cats, the S means plurality. It means there is more than one.
Simple enough. Cat, cats.
But in a verb, like eats, as in he eats the S, means something entirely different. It indicates a third-person singular present tense verb.
So one tiny piece of grammatical form is doing double duty. It's sharing entirely different kinds of meaning.
Exactly. Now, to elevate this beyond basic grammar, imagine you are translating a highly complex piece of literature, or a poem, that relies entirely on that exact trick.
Oh, I see where this is going.
The author purposefully uses the English S to play a double duty trick, making a word function as both a plural noun and a singular verb simultaneously to create a specific artistic effect.
Oh, wow. That's a trap.
You cannot translate that, because no other language on earth is going to have that exact same grammatical quirk where one specific letter performs those two exact functions.
The translation fails because the form itself is the art.
Yes, the form itself is functionally relevant to the meaning. You cannot substitute the form without entirely losing the artistic trick.
That is fascinating. The physical architecture of the language is the art. Now let's talk about the second category, which I find even more compelling. Cultural untranslatability.
This is where we really see how deeply language is intertwined with our reality.
Right. This is when the culture, the way people actually live, gets in the way of translation.
We don't just put different labels on the exact same world, we experience different worlds.
The source gives this amazing, very clear example. The Japanese word yukata.
Ah, yes, the yukata problem. A classic case study for students.
Let's say you are an English translator and you come across the word yukata in a Japanese novel. How do you translate it? Let's use Catford's method and look at the situational features.
Let's do it.
The source unpacks what a yukata actually is in Japanese culture. It is a loose robe. It is worn by men or women. It is frequently supplied to guests at a hotel or inn.
So far, an English translator might look at those features and say, oh, that perfectly matches the situational features of a bathrobe, or perhaps a dressing gown.
Exactly. And if they stop there, they might think they found textual equivalence. But wait, there's more. The yukata is worn indoors, yes, but it's also worn outdoors, in the street, to cafes, to summer evening festivals.
And right there is the massive cultural clash.
Right. Because think about English culture. If I say bathrobe to you, what is the situational image you get in your head?
I picture someone fresh out of the shower, hair wet, drinking a cup of coffee in their private kitchen.
Right.
I definitely, absolutely do not picture someone wearing it to a crowded street festival.
Exactly. You'd get arrested, or at least stared at very strangely. No English speaker relates a bathrobe to something you wear to a public summer festival.
Never.
Because the English language and the English-speaking culture simply lacks a concept for a single garment that is socially acceptable in all of those exact situations.
So, perfect textual equivalence is strictly impossible.
It is impossible. You can write bathrobe in your translation, but the English reader will get completely the wrong image in their head. The situational substance simply doesn't match.
So what does a translator actually do in that scenario?
Yeah, what's the fix?
They are forced into imperfect compromises. They might just have to borrow the word, leave it as yukata, and hope the reader figures it out from context.
Or write a footnote.
Right, a clunky footnote explaining Japanese garments, which pulls the reader right out of the story.
It really highlights that we divide the world up differently based on our cultural experiences. When the cultural realities simply do not overlap, translation hits an insurmountable brick wall.
It's a humbling realization for anyone studying languages.
So what does this all mean for you, the student, the future translator, or just a curious learner listening to this? Let's bring all these threads together.
I think the main takeaway from Catford is that translation is emphatically not a math problem.
Right.
The variable x in one language does not always smoothly equal y in another.
It really doesn't. Today we explore the true nature of equivalence. We learned that meaning isn't something you carry in a bucket across a border.
It is a value you must substitute from one complex system into another.
And we looked at the constant tug-of-war of form versus meaning. We saw that true, effective translation often requires us to boldly abandon the formal structure of the source language.
You have to be willing to break the grammatical rules and execute translation shifts to capture the true equivalent situation.
You have to let go of the source language's structure to fully embrace the target language's reality, whether it is turning the phrase cats and dogs into pouring rain,
Or understanding that a casual Russian dismissal shouldn't sound like a solemn prayer to God.
or recognizing that a bathrobe will never truly encompass the cultural reality of a yukata. It is a complex, deeply frustrating, and incredibly beautiful art form.
It requires immense creativity, a scientific mind for observation, and deep empathy for how different cultures experience the world.
It absolutely does. And as we wrap up this deep dive into the linguistic theory of translation, we want to leave you with one final, slightly mind-bending thought to mull over long after you take your headphones off.
Yes. If true translation requires us to substitute meaning rather than literally transfer it,
Right.
and if true equivalence is, as Catford warns us, almost always just an approximation of situations and cultural
Maybe
realities,
they'll leave us.
does that mean every time you read a translated novel, you aren't actually reading the original book at all? Are you, in fact, just reading a meticulously crafted parallel universe recreation of it?
That is something to seriously think about the next time you pick up a translated masterpiece. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the code of translation. Keep learning, keep questioning, and we'll catch you next time.